At 3:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with another food delivery request from my 28-year-old son Marcus. "Mom, I need you to pick up some late-night tacos from that place on 5th Street. I'm starving and they don't deliver this late." I stared at the screen, my stomach churning as I calculated this would be the fourth food run this week, and it was only Wednesday. What started as occasional favors had somehow transformed me into his personal delivery service, and tonight, as I sat in my pajamas contemplating another midnight drive across town, I realized I'd become something I never thought possible: my own son's unpaid Uber Eats driver. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and at 58 years old, I thought I'd figured out the delicate balance between helping my children and enabling them. I was spectacularly wrong. For the past 2 years, what began as a mother's natural instinct to care for her child had evolved into something that left me exhausted, financially drained, and questioning every parenting decision I'd ever made. It started innocently enough, as these things always do. Marcus had moved back home after college, claiming he needed time to find his footing in the job market. As a single mother who'd raised 3 children on a teacher's salary, I understood the challenges young adults faced in today's economy. I'd scraped and saved to give my kids the best education possible, working summer jobs and taking on tutoring gigs to make ends meet. When Marcus needed help, saying no felt like abandoning everything I'd worked for as a mother. The food delivery requests began about 18 months ago. Marcus had landed a job at a tech startup downtown, and his schedule was demanding and unpredictable. He'd call during his lunch breaks, explaining that he was swamped with work and couldn't leave the office. Could I possibly grab him something from that new sushi place he'd been wanting to try? It was only a 20-minute drive each way, and seeing my son succeed in his career felt worth the small inconvenience. Those initial requests were reasonable. Maybe twice a week, always with genuine appreciation and promises to pay me back. Marcus would thank me profusely, telling me how much he appreciated having such a supportive mother. He'd share stories about his demanding boss and the pressure he was under to prove himself at the company. As a mother, hearing about his struggles made me want to do everything possible to ease his burden. But somewhere along the way, appreciation turned into expectation. The twice-weekly favors became daily demands. The 20-minute drives stretched to an hour or more, as his tastes became increasingly specific and exotic. He developed preferences for restaurants across the city, each one requiring me to navigate traffic and hunt for parking in busy commercial districts. The pattern became painfully predictable. My phone would ring or buzz with a text message, usually during the most inconvenient moments. I'd be in the middle of grading papers for my 5th grade class, or trying to relax after a long day of dealing with 28 energetic 10-year-olds, when Marcus would reach out with his latest craving: Vietnamese pho from a place in Chinatown, artisanal pizza from a trendy spot on the other side of town, expensive sushi from a restaurant that charged $30 for a basic roll. What made it particularly frustrating was Marcus's complete inability to plan ahead. He never called in the morning to let me know he'd need lunch. The requests always came with a sense of urgency, as if he'd suddenly realized he was hungry and needed immediate satisfaction. There was never consideration for my schedule, my commitments, or the fact that I might have my own life to live. The financial aspect began subtly but grew increasingly problematic. Initially, Marcus would reimburse me for the food costs, though he was often slow to pay me back. A $20 lunch would turn into an IOU that might take weeks to be honored. Gradually, the reimbursements became less frequent and eventually stopped altogether. When I brought up the money he owed me, Marcus would look genuinely confused, as if the idea of paying for his own food was a foreign concept. My own eating habits began to suffer as a result of this arrangement. While I was spending $40 to $60 on Marcus's gourmet lunches, I found myself eating peanut butter sandwiches or skipping meals entirely to make my grocery budget stretch. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was driving across town to buy expensive meals for my adult son while I couldn't afford to eat well myself. The emotional toll was perhaps even worse than the financial strain. Every food delivery request felt like a test of my worth as a mother. If I said no, was I being selfish? Was I failing to support my son during a crucial time in his career? Marcus had developed a sophisticated manipulation technique that made me feel guilty for even considering refusing his requests. He'd mention how stressed he was at work, how much pressure he was under, how grateful he was to have a mother who understood his needs. My friends began to notice the change in my behavior. Linda, my closest friend and fellow teacher, commented on how I always seemed to be rushing off somewhere during our lunch breaks. When I explained that I was picking up food for Marcus, she raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything directly. The looks I received from other people in my life spoke volumes about how unusual this arrangement appeared to outside observers. The requests weren't limited to lunch, either. Marcus's food demands expanded to cover breakfast, dinner, and late-night snacks. Weekend mornings would begin with text messages, asking me to pick up expensive coffee and pastries from boutique cafes. Evenings involved trips to upscale restaurants for takeout orders that often exceeded $50. The late-night requests were particularly exhausting, coming when I was already tired from a full day of teaching and looking forward to relaxing at home. Marcus's living situation made the entire arrangement even more baffling. He still lived in my house, sleeping in his childhood bedroom and using my kitchen, but he claimed he was too busy to cook or even make simple meals. The refrigerator would be full of groceries that I'd purchased, and that he'd ignore in favor of restaurant food that I was expected to fetch. The wastefulness was staggering, both financially and emotionally. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening in March. I'd had a particularly challenging day at school, dealing with a difficult parent conference and a classroom full of restless children who were struggling with a complex math concept. I was physically and emotionally drained, looking forward to a quiet evening at home with a cup of tea and a book I'd been trying to finish for weeks. At 9:30 p.m., just as I was settling into my favorite chair, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and I felt the familiar knot of anxiety form in my stomach. I knew what was coming before I even answered the call. "Mom, I know it's late, but I'm really craving that Korean barbecue from that place on Sunset Boulevard. Could you possibly run over there and grab me an order? I've been working on this project all day, and I haven't eaten anything substantial." I looked out the window at the rain that had been falling steadily all evening. The Korean restaurant was at least a 45-minute drive in good weather, and the rain would make the trip even longer and more treacherous. I was already in my pajamas, and the thought of getting dressed, driving across town in the rain, and waiting for a takeout order made me feel physically ill. "Marcus, it's really late and the weather is terrible. Can't you just make something here? There's leftover pasta in the refrigerator, or I could make you a sandwich." His response was immediate and sharp. "Mom, you know I can't eat that stuff. I need proper nutrition, especially when I'm working this hard. The project I'm on could make or break my career at this company. I thought you understood."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
How important this job is to me. The guilt hit like a physical blow. Here was my son, working hard to build his career, and I was being selfish about a simple favor. What kind of mother prioritizes her own comfort over her child's success? I found myself apologizing and reaching for my car keys before I'd even consciously decided to fulfill his request. The drive to the restaurant was miserable. The rain made visibility poor, and traffic was heavier than expected for a Thursday night. I spent 20 minutes looking for parking, then waited another 25 minutes for Marcus's order to be prepared. The total cost came to $68 for a meal that could have fed 4 people, money that represented a significant portion of my weekly grocery budget. By the time I returned home, it was nearly midnight. I was exhausted, soaked from running through the rain, and frustrated by the entire experience. When I delivered the food to Marcus's room, he barely looked up from his computer screen. There was no thank you, no acknowledgement of the effort I'd made, just a casual, "Just set it on the desk, Mom. I'll eat it in a few minutes." That night, lying in bed and listening to the rain against my window, I realized something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with my son. I wasn't helping him succeed. I was enabling him to avoid basic adult responsibilities. I wasn't being a supportive mother. I was being taken advantage of by someone who'd learned to weaponize my love against me. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and spent the day researching and documenting exactly how much time and money I'd been spending on Marcus's food delivery service. The numbers were staggering and heartbreaking. Over the past 18 months, I'd made approximately 300 food delivery trips for Marcus. At an average of 1 hour per trip, that represented nearly 400 hours of my time, the equivalent of 10 full work weeks. The financial cost was even more shocking. Between the food purchases and the gas money for all that driving, I'd spent over $12,000 feeding my adult son restaurant meals, while I subsisted on budget groceries and occasional treats. But the emotional cost was the most devastating revelation. I'd spent so much time and energy catering to Marcus's demands that I'd neglected my own needs, my friendships, and my personal interests. I couldn't remember the last time I'd read a book for pleasure, met friends for dinner, or pursued any of the hobbies that had once brought me joy. My entire life had become organized around my son's appetite and convenience. That afternoon, I made an appointment with a counselor who specialized in family dynamics and boundary issues. Dr. Sarah Chen was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach to therapy. When I explained my situation, she listened without judgment but asked probing questions that made me uncomfortable. Elena, when you describe these food delivery requests, how do you feel in the moment when Marcus calls? I thought about it carefully. Anxious, I guess. Like I have to drop everything and take care of his needs, or I'm failing as a mother. And after you complete these deliveries, how do you feel? Tired. Resentful sometimes, which makes me feel guilty because I should want to help my son. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. It sounds like you've been trained to believe that your value as a mother is directly tied to your willingness to sacrifice your own needs for Marcus's wants. Can you see the difference between needs and wants in this situation? The distinction hit me like a revelation. Marcus didn't need restaurant food delivered to him multiple times a day. He wanted it, and he'd learned that I would provide it regardless of the cost to myself. There was a kitchen full of food available to him. There were dozens of restaurants that offered delivery services. There were grocery stores where he could shop for himself. His requests weren't about survival. They were about convenience and control. Dr. Chen, I think I've been enabling him instead of helping him. What makes you say that? Because a truly supportive mother would be teaching her adult son to take care of himself, not doing everything for him so he never has to learn independence. That conversation marked the beginning of my plan to reclaim my life and teach Marcus some long overdue lessons about respect, responsibility, and the real-world consequences of treating people like personal servants. The documentation I'd compiled became the foundation for a strategy that Dr. Chen helped me develop. Instead of continuing to react emotionally to Marcus's demands, I would approach the situation methodically and with clear boundaries. The goal wasn't to punish my son, but to help him understand the impact of his behavior and to reestablish a healthy relationship between us. The first step was to stop fulfilling his food delivery requests without explanation or argument. Dr. Chen warned me that Marcus would likely escalate his demands and manipulation tactics when his usual methods stopped working. This was normal behavior for someone who'd grown accustomed to getting their way through emotional manipulation. The second step was to prepare responses to the various guilt trips and manipulation strategies Marcus would inevitably employ. We practiced phrases like, "I understand you're disappointed, but I'm not available to pick up food for you today, and I'm confident you can figure out an alternative solution for your meals." The third step was to document Marcus's responses to these new boundaries. Dr. Chen explained that manipulative people often reveal their true attitudes when their control tactics stop working. Recording these interactions would help me stay strong when Marcus tried to make me feel guilty for setting reasonable limits. I felt nervous but determined as I prepared to implement this plan. For too long, I'd prioritized keeping peace over maintaining self-respect. It was time to remember that being a good mother meant raising a son who could function independently in the world, not creating a man-child who expected women to cater to his every whim. The transformation wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. Marcus needed to learn that his actions had consequences, and I needed to rediscover who I was beyond my role as his personal food delivery service. The time had come to deliver him a reality check about how the real world actually worked. Little did I know that this decision would uncover secrets about Marcus's life that would make my food delivery concerns seem trivial in comparison. The rabbit hole of deception I was about to discover would challenge everything I thought I knew about my son and force me to make decisions I never imagined I'd have to face as a mother. The implementation of my new boundaries began on a Monday morning that felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. I'd spent the weekend mentally preparing myself for what Dr. Chen had warned would be an escalation in Marcus's behavior once he realized his usual tactics weren't working. At 11:23 a.m., right on schedule, my phone buzzed with a text message that made my hands shake despite my preparation. "Mom, emergency at work. Boss is breathing down my neck about the Peterson account. Need you to grab lunch from that new Mediterranean place on Harbor Street. The one with the lamb gyros I mentioned last week. Make it 2 orders, actually. I might need to work through dinner. You're a lifesaver." I stared at the message for a full minute, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Every instinct developed over 28 years of motherhood screamed at me to grab my keys and rush to help my struggling son. The familiar guilt began its predictable assault on my resolve. He was under pressure at work. He needed my support. What kind of mother would prioritize her own comfort over her child's career success? But then I remembered the numbers. $12,000. 400 hours. The Korean barbecue incident that had finally opened my eyes to how completely I'd lost myself in this arrangement. I typed a response that felt both terrifying and liberating. "I'm not available to pick up food today. There are several delivery apps you can use, or the office probably has restaurants nearby that you can walk to during your lunch break." I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then immediately turned off my phone. Dr. Chen had warned me that the first response would be crucial, and that I needed to avoid getting drawn into negotiations or explanations that Marcus could use to manipulate me back into compliance. When I turned my phone back on 2 hours later, there were 7 missed calls and a string of text messages that revealed more about my son's true character than 28 years of motherhood had shown me. The messages started with confusion. "Mom, did you get my text? This is really important." Then came attempts at manipulation. "I don't understand why you're being like this. I've had the worst morning, and I really need your support right now." Followed by guilt trips. "I guess I'll just have to skip lunch again. I hope you're happy knowing I'm going hungry while you're sitting at home doing nothing." And finally, anger. "This is ridiculous. You're my mother. Helping me shouldn't be such a big deal. I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but you're being incredibly selfish." Reading those messages felt like watching a mask slip off someone's face. The grateful, appreciative son who'd always thanked me for my sacrifices had been replaced by someone who viewed my assistance as an entitlement, and my refusal as a personal betrayal. The transformation was jarring and heartbreaking. But it was also enlightening. For the first time, I could see clearly how Marcus viewed our relationship. I wasn't his mother, I was his employee. An unpaid personal assistant whose job was to anticipate his needs and fulfill them without complaint or compensation. The respectful, loving son I thought I was helping didn't actually exist. He was a fiction I'd created to justify enabling behavior that no reasonable person would tolerate. The phone calls started that evening. Marcus had clearly decided that text messages weren't getting the response he wanted, so he was escalating to direct confrontation. I let the first few calls go to voicemail, and the messages grew increasingly agitated. "Mom, I need to talk to you. This whole thing is getting out of hand. Call me back. I don't know why you're ignoring me, but this silent treatment is really immature. We need to discuss this like adults." "Fine. If you want to play games, I can play games too. But don't expect me to forget how you're treating me right now." When I finally answered the phone at 8:30 p.m., Marcus's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Mom, what the hell is going on? You've been ignoring me all day, and I had to buy my own lunch like some kind of stranger. How was your first day of buying your own food?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and neutral. "That's not the point. The point is that you left me hanging when I needed you. I'm under enormous pressure at work, and instead of supporting me, you're creating additional stress." "Marcus, you're 28 years old. Buying your own food is a normal adult responsibility, not additional stress." "Don't patronize me, Mom. You know how demanding my job is. I don't have time to waste standing in restaurant lines or figuring out delivery apps. Then perhaps you should pack a lunch in the morning, like most working adults do. The silence that followed was so long, I thought the call had been disconnected. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice had taken on a tone I'd never heard before. Cold, calculating, and slightly threatening. I think you're having some kind of midlife crisis or something. This isn't like you at all. Maybe you should talk to someone about why you're suddenly acting so strange. The implication was clear. If I didn't return to my role as his personal food delivery service, he would begin questioning my mental stability. It was a sophisticated manipulation tactic that revealed a level of calculation I hadn't known my son possessed. I'm thinking very clearly, Marcus. For the first time in months, actually. We'll see about that, he said and hung up. That night, I called Dr. Chen's emergency line. The conversation with Marcus had shaken me more than I'd expected, not because of his anger, but because of the strategic way he'd tried to undermine my confidence in my own decision-making. Elena, what you're describing is called gaslighting, Dr. Chen explained. When someone realizes they can't control your behavior through their usual methods, they often try to make you question your own perception of reality. The fact that Marcus immediately jumped to questioning your mental state suggests this isn't the first time he's used this tactic. I thought back over the past 2 years, remembering conversations where Marcus had subtly suggested I was being overly emotional or not thinking clearly when I'd expressed any reluctance about his requests. I dismissed those comments as throwaway remarks, but now I could see the pattern. He'd been conditioning me to doubt myself whenever I considered saying no to him. What should I expect next? I asked. Escalation. He'll probably try different approaches, attempting to find the manipulation strategy that works. He might involve other people, trying to get them to pressure you on his behalf. He might make grand gestures or promises to change. The key is to remember that this behavior reveals who he really is when he doesn't get his way. Dr. Chen was right about the escalation. Over the next 3 days, Marcus deployed every manipulation tactic in his arsenal with the precision of someone who'd been studying my weaknesses for years. Tuesday morning brought the pity approach. Marcus appeared in the kitchen before I left for work, looking deliberately disheveled and pathetic. Mom, I barely slept last night. I'm so stressed about this project at work, and knowing that you're upset with me is making everything worse. I can't concentrate when there's tension between us. He'd positioned himself between me and the coffee maker, forcing me to acknowledge his presence. His eyes were red-rimmed, though whether from genuine emotion or calculated manipulation, I couldn't tell. I'm not upset with you, Marcus. I've just decided to stop delivering food to you during the day. But why? What did I do wrong? I thought you enjoyed helping me succeed. The question was designed to make me explain and justify my decision, opening the door for negotiation and argument. Dr. Chen had warned me about this trap. I don't need to have done anything wrong for me to change how I spend my time, I said, pouring my coffee and moving toward the door. So that's it? You're just going to abandon me when I need you most? I stopped at the door, looking back at this man who'd somehow learned to weaponize 28 years of maternal love against me. Marcus, you're a college-educated adult with a good job. Feeding yourself isn't abandonment, it's basic life skills. Wednesday brought the anger approach. I came home from work to find Marcus pacing in the living room, clearly agitated and ready for confrontation. I talked to Aunt Linda today, he said without preamble. She thinks you're going through some kind of mental breakdown. She's worried about you. My sister Linda had always been Marcus's ally, charmed by his polite demeanor and impressed by his career success. She'd often commented on what a devoted mother I was, though I now wondered if her praise had been more about Marcus's manipulation of the situation than my actual parenting. What exactly did you tell Linda? I told her the truth, that you've suddenly stopped helping me and you're acting completely different. She agrees that this isn't normal behavior for you. Did you mention that the help you're referring to involves me driving across town multiple times a day to buy you restaurant food? Marcus's face flushed. You're making it sound worse than it is. I never forced you to do anything. No, you just made me feel guilty and selfish whenever I considered saying no. That's not true. You offered to help me. I never asked you to do anything you didn't want to do. The revisionist history was breathtaking. In Marcus's version of events, I'd been eagerly volunteering to serve as his personal food delivery service, and he'd been doing me a favor by accepting my assistance. The gaslighting was so complete that I almost found myself doubting my own memories. Thursday brought the bargaining approach. Marcus knocked on my bedroom door at 6 a.m. before I was even fully awake. Mom, I've been thinking about our situation, and I want to make some changes. What if I start paying you for the food deliveries? Like a regular delivery service, with tips and everything. I sat up in bed, trying to process this offer through my morning fog. Marcus, this isn't about money. Then what is it about? I'm trying to understand what you want from me. I want you to take care of yourself. I want you to stop treating me like your personal employee. But I appreciate everything you do for me. I tell you that all the time. Appreciation isn't the same as respect, Marcus. Respect would be understanding that I have my own life and responsibilities. Okay, then what if we limit it to just lunch? 1 meal a day, and I'll give you advance notice so you can plan for it. The offer was tempting because it felt like compromise, but Dr. Chen had warned me about this trap too. Any concession would signal that my boundaries were negotiable, that the right combination of pressure and persuasion could wear me down. No, Marcus. I'm done being your food delivery service. Fine, he said, his voice turning cold again. But don't expect me to forget how little you care about my success. Friday brought the most sophisticated manipulation attempt yet. I came home to find Marcus in the kitchen with 2 other people. His girlfriend Sarah, whom I'd met a few times, and a man I didn't recognize. Mom, this is Derek, my therapist, Marcus said with a concerned expression. I asked him to come over because I'm really worried about the changes in your behavior. I felt my blood pressure spike. Marcus had brought a stranger into my home under the guise of mental health intervention, using my natural respect for therapy and professional authority to manipulate me. It was a breathtakingly cynical move. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Rodriguez, Derek said, extending his hand. Marcus has told me about some concerning changes in your routine, and I wanted to check in with you. I didn't shake his hand. I don't recall scheduling a therapy session in my own home. Derek looked uncomfortable, glancing between Marcus and me. Of course, this is just an informal conversation. Marcus is concerned that you might be experiencing some kind of crisis. The only crisis I'm experiencing is learning that my adult son thinks he can manipulate me into continued servitude by questioning my mental health. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, and I could see her reevaluating the situation. Whatever Marcus had told her about my behavior, she was now witnessing a calm, rational woman refusing to be manipulated by theatrical interventions. Mrs. Rodriguez, Derek continued, sometimes changes in long-established patterns can indicate underlying stress or depression. You're absolutely right, I said. I was depressed when I was spending 400 hours of my time and $12,000 of my money enabling my son's refusal to take care of himself. Now that I've stopped, I feel much better. The specific numbers seemed to surprise Derek. He looked at Marcus with a different expression, and I could see him beginning to understand that there might be more to this story than he'd been told. Marcus, you didn't mention the financial aspect of this situation, Derek said carefully. Because it's not relevant, Marcus replied quickly. My mother offered to help me, and now she's using it against me. $12,000 over 18 months seems like a significant amount of assistance, Derek observed. I watched Marcus realize that his attempt to use professional authority against me had backfired. Derek was clearly beginning to see this situation as a boundary issue rather than a mental health crisis. I think perhaps this conversation should take place in a more appropriate setting, Derek said diplomatically. Marcus, why don't you call my office and we can schedule a proper session to discuss these family dynamics? After they left, I sat in my kitchen feeling both exhausted and oddly exhilarated. The week had been emotionally draining, but I'd successfully held my boundaries against every manipulation tactic Marcus could devise. More importantly, I'd learned something crucial about my son's character that I could never unknown. The person I'd raised wasn't struggling with independence because he lacked knowledge or confidence. He was choosing dependence because he'd learned that manipulation and emotional blackmail could get him everything he wanted without effort or reciprocity. The grateful, appreciative persona he'd cultivated was a mask designed to hide a fundamentally selfish and calculating nature. That weekend, I decided to take my investigation further. If Marcus was this manipulative about food delivery, what else was he hiding? I'd been so focused on the immediate problem of his daily demands that I hadn't looked at the bigger picture of his life and finances. I started by reviewing the mail that came to the house. As a resident, Marcus received various correspondence here, and I'd always respected his privacy by not opening anything addressed to him. But now I paid attention to the return addresses and postmarks, looking for patterns that might reveal information about his actual financial situation. What I discovered was shocking. There were multiple credit card statements from companies I'd never heard of, late payment notices from various creditors, collection agency letters that had been marked urgent and, quote, final notice. The volume of financial correspondence suggested someone whose finances were in complete chaos, not the successful young professional Marcus pretended to be. I also began paying attention to his daily routine in ways I'd never done before. Marcus claimed to be working long hours and managing high-pressure projects, but I noticed he often didn't leave the house until late morning and frequently returned by mid-afternoon. His work schedule seemed far more flexible than someone under the kind of pressure he described. On Saturday evening, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. I was going to Marcus's workplace on Monday, not to deliver food, but to learn the truth about his employment situation. If he was lying about his work demands to justify his food delivery requests, I needed to know. If he was genuinely struggling professionally, perhaps we could find ways for me to support him that didn't involve treating me like a servant. But first, I had one more boundary to establish. Sunday morning, I knocked on Marcus's bedroom door and waited for permission to enter. When he opened the door, he looked surprised to see me standing there with a serious expression. "Marcus, we need to have a conversation about your living situation here." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if you're going to continue living in my house, there need to be some ground rules about respect and responsibilities." He crossed his arms defensively. "Like what?" "Like contributing to household expenses. Like cleaning up after yourself. Like treating me with the same courtesy you'd show a roommate or landlord." "I can't believe you're charging me rent now. I'm your son. Being my son doesn't entitle you to free housing while treating me with disrespect." "Fine. How much do you want?" I named a figure that was exactly half the market rate for a one-bedroom apartment in our area. Marcus's reaction told me everything I needed to know about his financial reality. "Are you insane? I can't afford that much money every month." "Then perhaps you should consider finding more affordable accommodations." "With what money? You know how much I make." "Actually, Marcus, I don't know how much you make. You've never told me your salary, and I've never asked. But if you can afford to eat $60 restaurant meals multiple times a week, surely you can afford to contribute something to the household that feeds and shelters you." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, but the outcome was clear. Marcus had been living in a fantasy where his housing was free, his food was delivered by personal service, and his only responsibility was maintaining the charming facade that kept the benefits flowing. Monday morning, I called in sick to work again and drove to the address Marcus had given me as his workplace. The building was modern and impressive. Exactly the kind of place where a successful tech professional might work. I parked across the street and waited, curious to see if Marcus would actually show up. At 10:15 a.m., I watched my son walk into the building carrying a coffee cup and looking relaxed and unhurried. So far, his story checked out. He did work where he claimed to work, and his schedule seemed to match what he'd told me, but I decided to wait longer, curious about when he would take his lunch break and how he would handle his meal situation without my assistance. What I discovered would change everything I thought I knew about my son's life and force me to confront a deception far more serious than food delivery manipulation. At 11:45 a.m., Marcus emerged from the building, but instead of heading toward restaurants or taking lunch with colleagues, he walked 2 blocks to a different office building and disappeared inside. I waited for 20 minutes, but he didn't come back out. Confused and concerned, I decided to approach the reception desk of Marcus's supposed workplace and ask for information. The woman behind the desk was professional, and helpful when I explained that I was trying to reach my son Marcus Rodriguez, who worked for the company. "I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name employed here," she said after checking her computer system. "Are you sure? He's been working here for almost 2 years. Tall, brown hair, usually wears button-down shirts." "I've been here for 3 years, and I know most of our employees. There's definitely no Marcus Rodriguez working for this company." I sat in my car for 15 minutes, trying to process this information. Marcus had been leaving the house every day, dressed professionally, carrying a briefcase, talking about meetings and deadlines and projects. But he didn't actually work where he claimed to work. Where had he been going every day? What had he been doing for income? How had he been affording his lifestyle if he wasn't employed? The pieces of a much larger deception were beginning to come together, and I realized that the food delivery manipulation had been just the tip of an iceberg that was about to sink everything I thought I knew about my son. The drive home from Marcus's fake workplace felt like traveling through an alternate reality, where everything I thought I knew had been turned upside down. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, and I had to pull over twice because my vision was blurring with tears of shock and betrayal. For almost 2 years, my son had been living an elaborate lie, leaving the house every morning in business attire, carrying a briefcase, discussing work projects and office politics that were apparently complete fiction. I sat in a parking lot outside a grocery store, trying to piece together the implications of what I'd discovered. If Marcus wasn't working at the tech company he claimed, where was he going every day? How was he paying for his expensive tastes in food and clothing? Most importantly, how long had he been lying to me about fundamental aspects of his life? The questions multiplied faster than I could process them. I thought about the times he'd called me from what he claimed was his office, describing demanding meetings and urgent deadlines. I remembered conversations where he'd shared details about colleagues and projects, stories that had seemed genuine and heartfelt. Had every single interaction been a performance designed to manipulate my sympathy and support? When I finally made it home, Marcus was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and papers spread around him in what appeared to be a professional work session. He looked up when I entered, his expression shifting from casual concentration to concern when he saw my face. "Mom, you look terrible. Are you feeling okay?" The caring tone in his voice felt like a slap after what I'd just discovered. Here he was, continuing the charade, even when I'd seen behind the curtain of his deception. The performance was so seamless, so automatic, that I wondered if he even remembered what was real anymore. "I'm fine," I managed to say, walking past him toward my bedroom. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to confront someone who had proven himself capable of sustaining massive lies for years. "Mom, wait," Marcus called after me. "I wanted to apologize for bringing Derek over yesterday. I was just worried about you, but I realize now that it was inappropriate to ambush you like that." Even his apology was manipulation, designed to make me feel guilty for being angry about his boundary violations. The sophistication of his emotional manipulation was staggering, and I realized I was dealing with someone far more calculating than I'd ever imagined. I locked my bedroom door and called Dr. Chen's office, requesting an emergency session. When I explained what I'd discovered about Marcus's employment, there was a long pause before she responded. "Elena, what you're describing suggests a level of deception that goes far beyond boundary issues. If Marcus has been maintaining a fake job for 2 years, lying about his daily activities and income source, we're looking at a pathological pattern of behavior. What do you think I should do? First, you need to gather more information. If he's not working where he claims, you need to find out what he's actually doing and how he's supporting himself. Second, you need to prepare for the possibility that this deception is connected to illegal activities. People don't usually maintain elaborate lies about employment, unless they're hiding something serious." The word illegal hit me like a physical blow. I'd been focused on food delivery manipulation and disrespectful behavior, but Dr. Chen was right. Normal unemployment or job struggles didn't require the kind of systematic deception Marcus had been maintaining. "There's something else you should consider," Dr. Chen continued. "If Marcus is involved in illegal activities, your home could be at risk. You need to protect yourself legally and financially." That evening, I began what felt like detective work in my own home. While Marcus was in his room, presumably continuing whatever elaborate fiction he was living. I searched through areas of the house he'd been using. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I needed to understand the scope of his deception. In the garage, I found boxes I'd never seen before, filled with what appeared to be electronic equipment and packaging materials. There were dozens of small electronic devices still in their original packaging, along with shipping labels and bubble wrap mailers. The equipment looked expensive and new, but I couldn't understand why Marcus would have so much of it, or what he planned to do with it. In his bedroom, while he was in the shower, I discovered a second laptop hidden under his mattress. When I opened it, I found spreadsheets with hundreds of names, addresses, and financial information that looked like credit card numbers and bank account details. My stomach dropped as I realized I was looking at what appeared to be stolen personal information organized into neat, professional databases. The magnitude of what I was seeing made me feel physically sick. This wasn't just unemployment or even small-scale fraud. Marcus appeared to be involved in identity theft and credit card fraud on a massive scale. The electronics in the garage were probably stolen goods he was reselling, and the financial information on the laptop represented hundreds of potential victims. I carefully photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking as I documented evidence of crimes that could send my son to federal prison. The mother in me wanted to confront him immediately, to demand explanations and give him a chance to come clean. But the rational part of my mind knew I needed to protect myself and gather complete evidence before taking any action. The next morning, I called in sick to work again and drove to the police station. Detective Maria Santos was a woman in her 40s who specialized in financial crimes, and she listened to my story with the kind of professional attention that made me feel both relieved and terrified. "Mrs. Rodriguez, what you're describing sounds like a sophisticated identity theft operation. The electronic equipment you found is probably card skimmers and point-of-sale devices used to steal credit card information. The database of personal information could represent thousands of victims. What should I do? He's my son, but I can't let him continue hurting innocent people. First, you need to understand that by living in your home, Marcus has potentially made you an unwitting accomplice to federal crimes. If law enforcement raids your house and finds this evidence, you could be charged as a co-conspirator unless you can prove you were unaware of his activities." The legal implications were staggering. Not only had Marcus been living a lie and manipulating me emotionally, but he'd been using my home as a base of operations for criminal activities that could destroy my life and career. As a teacher, any criminal charges would end my ability to work with children and ruin my reputation in the community. "What we need to do is build a case that demonstrates your innocence while gathering evidence of his crimes," Detective Santos continued. "Are you willing to cooperate with an investigation?" The question felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Agreeing to cooperate meant potentially sending my own son to federal prison. Refusing meant becoming complicit in crimes that were hurting innocent victims every day. There was no middle ground, no way to fix this situation with maternal love and good intentions. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'll cooperate." The investigation required me to continue living with Marcus, while wearing a recording device and gathering evidence of his criminal activities. It was the most surreal and emotionally devastating period of my life, pretending normalcy while documenting proof that would destroy my son's future. Over the next 2 weeks, I recorded conversations where Marcus casually discussed his business ventures in language that clearly described identity theft and credit card fraud. He talked about, quote, clients who were actually victims, inventory that was actually stolen financial information, and, quote, profit margins that represented money stolen from innocent people. The most chilling discovery was learning about the scope of his operation. Marcus wasn't working alone. He was part of a network of criminals who specialized in different aspects of financial fraud. Some members stole the initial information, others created fake identification documents, and Marcus's role was converting stolen data into cash through online purchases and resale of goods. During one recorded conversation, Marcus explained his daily routine to someone on the phone, and I finally understood where he went every morning. The building I'd seen him enter was the headquarters of his criminal network, where he coordinated with other fraud specialists and managed his portion of their illegal enterprise. The beauty of this setup is that I'm living with my mom, so my overhead is basically zero, he said into the phone while I pretended to be reading in the next room. She even drives around the city running errands for me, so I don't have to worry about transportation costs. She thinks she's helping me build my career, but she's actually subsidizing my real business. Hearing him describe my maternal love as a business expense was devastating, but it also crystallized something important. Marcus didn't view me as his mother. He viewed me as a resource to be exploited. The food delivery manipulation had been just one aspect of a much larger pattern of using my emotions against me to support his criminal lifestyle. The evidence I gathered revealed that Marcus had been stealing approximately $30,000 per month through his fraud operation. The money I'd spent on his food deliveries was pocket change compared to his actual income, which made his manipulation even more cruel and unnecessary. He could have easily afforded to buy his own meals, but he preferred to make me do it as a way of maintaining control and dominance. Detective Santos explained that Marcus's psychological profile fit a pattern common among financial criminals. They often target family members not because they need the financial support, but because they enjoy the power and control. Making you drive across town for food wasn't about convenience. It was about proving to himself that he could manipulate you into doing anything. 3 weeks after beginning the investigation, law enforcement was ready to make arrests. The raid was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, when Marcus would be at his criminal headquarters, minimizing the trauma of having him arrested in my home. I spent Monday night lying awake, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the little boy who used to bring me drawings from school and tell me I was the best mother in the world. Where had that child gone? When had he been replaced by this calculating stranger who viewed my love as a weakness to exploit? At 6 a.m. Tuesday morning, I received a text message that the arrests were beginning. Over the next 4 hours, 12 members of the fraud network were taken into custody, including Marcus. By noon, Detective Santos called to tell me it was over. We recovered over $2 million in stolen goods and evidence of fraud affecting more than 5,000 victims, she said. Your son is facing federal charges that could result in 15 to 20 years in prison. I sat in my empty house, surrounded by the silence that comes after a crisis ends, and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For the first time in 2 years, I knew exactly where Marcus was and what he was doing. There were no more lies, no more manipulation, no more wondering if the person I was talking to was real or just another performance. The legal process moved quickly. Marcus's court-appointed attorney advised him to accept a plea bargain that would result in 12 years in federal prison in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations into financial fraud networks. The alternative was risking a trial that could result in a much longer sentence. I attended his sentencing hearing sitting in the back of the courtroom and listening to the judge describe the scope of Marcus's crimes and their impact on his victims. Some of the victims had lost their life savings. Others had their credit destroyed and faced years of financial recovery. One elderly couple had been forced to sell their home after Marcus's network drained their retirement accounts. When given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, Marcus stood and delivered what sounded like a rehearsed apology. He talked about making poor choices and letting down the people who loved him. He expressed remorse for his actions and promised to use his time in prison to become a better person. But, watching him perform even in that moment, I could see the same manipulation techniques he'd used on me for years. He was saying what he thought the judge wanted to hear, crafting his words to generate sympathy and minimize his responsibility. Even facing 12 years in federal prison, he was still trying to manipulate his way out of consequences. After the hearing, Marcus's attorney approached me in the hallway. "Mrs. Rodriguez, Marcus would like to speak with you before he's transferred to federal custody." I followed him to a small conference room where Marcus sat in orange jail clothes, his hands shackled to a chain around his waist. He looked young and vulnerable, and for a moment I felt the old maternal instinct to comfort and protect him. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I got in over my head, and I didn't know how to get out. Marcus, you maintained a fake job. For 2 years. You stole millions of dollars from innocent people. You used my home as a criminal headquarters. This wasn't getting in over your head. This was a calculated choice to live as a criminal. I know, but I want to make it right. When I get out, I'll pay back every penny I stole. I'll rebuild our relationship. I'll be the son you deserve. Even in that moment, facing 12 years in prison, he was still trying to manipulate me with promises and future scenarios designed to maintain emotional connection. The performance was automatic, reflexive, like breathing. Marcus, I hope prison gives you time to figure out who you want to be when you're not lying and stealing. But I won't be waiting for you when you get out. His face changed, the mask of contrition slipping to reveal something cold and angry underneath. So that's it? You're abandoning me when I need you most? What kind of mother does that? The kind of mother who finally learned the difference between love and enablement. I left him sitting in that conference room and walked out of the courthouse into bright afternoon sunlight. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The aftermath of Marcus's arrest was complicated and difficult. I had to testify before a grand jury about his activities and my unwitting role in providing him with a base of operations. The media coverage of the fraud network mentioned my address, leading to curious neighbors and uncomfortable questions at work. But I also discovered strength and resilience I didn't know I possessed. The same determination that had helped me raise 3 children as a single mother helped me rebuild my life after my son's betrayal. I sold the house that had been contaminated by his criminal activities and moved to a smaller place across town where I could start fresh. My relationship with my other 2 children, Maria and Carlos, actually grew stronger after Marcus's arrest. They'd both been uncomfortable with his treatment of me, but hadn't known how to address it. Learning about his criminal activities helped them understand that my food delivery compliance hadn't been maternal devotion. It had been manipulation by someone skilled at exploiting emotional vulnerabilities. Dr. Chen helped me work through the complex grief of losing a child to criminal behavior. You're mourning the son you thought you had while learning to accept the reality of who he actually was, she explained. That's one of the most difficult psychological processes a parent can experience. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, I received a letter from him in prison. It was 8 pages long, filled with apologies, explanations, and promises. He described the therapy he was receiving and the insights he was gaining about his behavior. He wrote about his plans for the future and his hopes for rebuilding our relationship. But reading between the lines, I could see the same manipulation patterns that had controlled me for years. He was studying my psychology through our history together and crafting his words to generate maximum emotional impact. Even from federal prison, he was still trying to manipulate me into resuming my role as his emotional and financial support system. I wrote back a single sentence. I hope you find peace and purpose in your life, but our relationship is over. A year later, I was sitting in my new garden, reading a book and enjoying the quiet satisfaction of an evening that belonged entirely to me. My phone sat nearby, silent and peaceful, no longer an instrument of manipulation and emergency demands. I'd learned to cook elaborate meals for myself, not because anyone else expected it, but because I enjoyed the creative process and deserved good food. Linda stopped by that evening, bringing a bottle of wine and updates about her own family. We talked about books, travel plans, and the art class I'd started taking at the community center. The conversation was relaxed and genuine, free from the undercurrent of crisis management that had dominated my life when Marcus was manipulating me. You seem so much happier, Linda observed. I know it must be hard having Marcus in prison, but you look like a different person than you did 2 years ago. She was right, I was different. I'd learned that being a good mother didn't mean accepting abuse from my children. I discovered that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enabling that hurts everyone involved. Most importantly, I'd found out who I was when I wasn't defined by someone else's demands and manipulation. The experience taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to participate in their destructive behavior. Marcus had needed consequences for his actions, not another enabler who would help him avoid responsibility. By allowing myself to be manipulated into supporting his lifestyle, I'd been preventing him from facing the reality of his choices. I still think about him sometimes, wondering if he's using his time in prison for genuine self-reflection, or just developing more sophisticated manipulation techniques. I hope for his sake that he finds a way to build an honest life when he's released, but I know that outcome isn't something I can control or influence. What I can control is my own life, my own choices, and my own boundaries. At 60 years old, I'm finally learning to put my own needs first without guilt or apology. I'm discovering interests and friendships that have nothing to do with being useful to other people. I'm building a life based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. The food delivery demands that had seemed like such a crisis were actually just symptoms of a much larger problem. Marcus hadn't needed my help with meals. He'd needed me to maintain the illusion that he was a struggling young professional rather than a criminal living off stolen money. By refusing to continue enabling his lies, I'd inadvertently uncovered a criminal enterprise that was hurting thousands of innocent people. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never found the courage to say no to his manipulation. Would he have eventually involved me more directly in his criminal activities? Would I have become an unwitting accomplice to increasingly serious crimes? The thought is terrifying and serves as a reminder that enabling someone's destructive behavior can lead to consequences far beyond what we initially imagine. My new life isn't perfect, but it's authentic. I wake up each morning knowing that my time and energy will be spent on things that matter to me, not on managing someone else's manufactured crises. I've learned to trust my instincts again, to recognize manipulation when it's happening, and to value my own well-being as much as I value other people's. The greatest gift of this experience has been discovering that I'm stronger than I thought I was. For years, I believed that good mothers sacrificed everything for their children without question or limit. Now I understand that good mothers teach their children to be independent, respectful, and responsible adults. Sometimes that means saying no, setting boundaries, and allowing natural consequences to occur. I hope that wherever Marcus is in his journey, he eventually learns these lessons too. But whether he does or doesn't, I know I'll be okay. I spent too many years waiting for other people to change before I could be happy. Now I'm building happiness on the foundation of my own choices, my own values, and my own strength. The woman who used to drop everything to deliver expensive meals to her manipulative son is gone, replaced by someone who knows her worth and protects her peace. It took 60 years to learn that lesson, but it wasn't too late. It's never too late to start choosing yourself, to start demanding respect, and to start building the life you actually want to live. 3 years had passed since Marcus's sentencing, and I was finally living the life I'd always imagined but never thought I deserved. My small cottage on Maple Street had become a sanctuary, filled with plants, books, and the kind of comfortable furniture that invited relaxation rather than constant vigilance. The morning routine I'd developed felt like a luxury after years of being on call for someone else's manufactured emergencies. This particular Tuesday started like most others. I woke naturally at 6:30, made coffee in my favorite ceramic mug, and settled onto the porch swing to watch the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the gentle sounds of birds and the distant hum of traffic as the city slowly awakened. No urgent phone calls, no dramatic requests, no manipulation disguised as family obligation. At 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from my daughter Maria. "Mom, Carlos and I want to take you to lunch this weekend. We have some news to share." The message made me smile because it represented everything my relationship with Marcus had never been: mutual respect, consideration for my schedule, and genuine desire for my company rather than my services. My relationship with my other 2 children had flourished in ways I hadn't expected after Marcus's arrest. Without the constant drama and crisis management that had dominated family gatherings, we'd discovered we actually enjoyed each other's company. Maria, now 32 and working as a nurse, had always been independent and self-sufficient, but she'd grown more openly affectionate once she no longer had to compete with Marcus's theatrical demands for attention. Carlos, 25 and finishing his master's degree in engineering, had confided that he'd been afraid to ask me for legitimate help during his college years, because he'd watched how Marcus had exploited my generosity. "I didn't want to burden you when you were already doing so much for him," he'd explained during one of our regular coffee dates. I didn't realize until later that what he was doing wasn't normal. Learning that my enabling of Marcus had actually harmed my relationship with my other children had been one of the most painful realizations of this entire experience. While I'd been bending over backward to accommodate Marcus's endless demands, I'd inadvertently sent the message that his needs were more important than anyone else's, including my own. My other children had learned to be self-reliant, not by choice, but because they'd seen how demanding attention and assistance could consume someone's entire life. That afternoon, I was volunteering at the Literacy Center, where I tutored adults working toward their high school equivalency diplomas. Teaching had always been my passion, but working with adult learners had given me a new perspective on resilience and second chances. Many of my students were people who'd made difficult choices in their past and were now working to build better futures for themselves and their families. One of my regular students, James, was a 40-year-old man who'd spent 15 years in federal prison for financial crimes. He was intelligent, articulate, and genuinely committed to rebuilding his life. But he struggled with basic math concepts that he'd never learned properly as a child. Working with him had helped me understand that people could change, but only if they took genuine responsibility for their past actions and committed to different choices moving forward. Mrs. Rodriguez, James said after we'd finished working through a particularly challenging algebra problem, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but you seem like someone who understands what it's like to have family members make bad choices." I looked at him carefully, wondering how much of my story had become public knowledge through media coverage of Marcus's case. "What makes you say that?" "Just the way you work with people like me. You don't treat us like we're broken or hopeless, but you also don't let us make excuses or avoid responsibility. It takes a special kind of understanding to find that balance." His observation made me realize how much I'd grown from the experience with Marcus. I'd learned to distinguish between supporting someone's genuine efforts to improve and enabling their refusal to change. With my students, I provided resources, encouragement, and structure, but I didn't do their work for them or accept elaborate explanations for why they couldn't complete assignments. I've learned that helping someone sometimes means not helping them, I said, carefully. Real support means believing in someone's ability to solve their own problems. James nodded thoughtfully. "My mother used to bail me out every time I got in trouble. She thought she was showing love, but she was actually preventing me from learning how to handle consequences. It wasn't until she finally said no that I had to face what I'd become." His words resonated deeply because they described exactly what I'd been doing with Marcus. My constant rescue missions had prevented him from experiencing the natural consequences of his choices, allowing him to continue making increasingly destructive decisions without ever facing reality. That evening, I received an unexpected phone call from Detective Santos. We'd stayed in touch occasionally since Marcus's sentencing, and she'd become something of a friend as well as a professional contact. "Elena, I wanted to give you an update on Marcus's case. He's been trying to contact some of his victims from prison, claiming he wants to make amends. The letters are being intercepted, but I thought you should know in case he tries to reach out to you again." My stomach clenched at this news. I'd hoped that 3 years in federal prison might have given Marcus time for genuine self-reflection. But it sounded like he was still trying to manipulate people, even from behind bars. What kind of things is he saying in the letters? The usual pattern we see with financial criminals. Lots of remorse and promises to pay back what he stole, but also attempts to gather information about his victims' current financial situations. He's fishing for details he could use in future fraud schemes. The news was disappointing, but not entirely surprising. Dr. Chen had warned me that people with Marcus's psychological profile rarely experienced genuine rehabilitation without intensive therapy and a sincere commitment to change. Most simply became more sophisticated in their manipulation techniques. Has he mentioned me in any of these communications? Actually, yes. He's told several people that his mother abandoned him when he needed her most, and that family support is crucial for successful reintegration into society. He's essentially trying to use your decision to maintain boundaries as evidence that he's a victim. Even from federal prison, Marcus was still trying to manipulate people by painting me as the villain in his story. The narrative he was crafting portrayed him as a misunderstood young man whose crimes had resulted from lack of family support, conveniently omitting the years of manipulation and the criminal enterprise he'd operated from my home. "Detective Santos, what happens when he's released? Will I be notified?" He's still got 9 years left on his sentence, but yes. Victim notification laws require us to inform you when he's eligible for parole or early release. Given the scope of his crimes and his apparent lack of genuine remorse, early release is unlikely. 9 more years of peace. 9 more years to continue building a life based on my own choices, rather than someone else's manipulation. The number felt like a gift, even though I knew that Marcus's eventual release would force me to make difficult decisions about safety and boundaries. That weekend, Maria and Carlos took me to lunch at a charming bistro downtown, the kind of place I'd never felt comfortable visiting when my budget was stretched thin by Marcus's expensive food demands. We ordered appetizers, entrees, and dessert without anyone calculating costs or feeling guilty about spending money on enjoyment. "Mom, we have something to tell you," Maria said after our meals arrived. "Carlos and I have been talking, and we want to buy you a house." I nearly choked on my soup. "What? Not just any house," Carlos added quickly. "There's a beautiful cottage for sale in Asheville, North Carolina, near the mountains. It has a garden and a front porch and everything you've always talked about wanting. We know you've been saving money and rebuilding your finances since Marcus's arrest," Maria continued. "But we also know that what he did affected your credit and your ability to qualify for a mortgage. We want to buy the house and let you live there for as long as you want." The offer was generous and loving, but it also triggered my newly developed sensitivity to financial arrangements that could become complicated. "That's incredibly kind, but I can't let you both take on that kind of financial obligation for me." "Mom," Carlos said gently, "do you remember when I was in college and my car broke down? You spent your entire tax refund to buy me a reliable used car so I could keep my job and finish school. And when I was going through my divorce," Maria added, "you let me and the kids live with you for 8 months while I got back on my feet. You never asked for rent or made me feel like a burden." "That's different," I protested. "You were both going through genuine hardships and working to improve your situations. And you're rebuilding your life after being victimized by financial crimes," Maria replied firmly. "This isn't charity, Mom. This is family taking care of family in a healthy way." The distinction they were making was important. Unlike Marcus's manipulation and exploitation, this offer came with no strings attached, no hidden agendas, and no expectation that I would sacrifice my autonomy or self-respect. They weren't trying to control me or make me dependent. They were trying to give me freedom and security. "Besides," Carlos added with a grin, "we've already put in an offer on the house. We were hoping you'd say yes, but we figured even if you refused, we could use it as a vacation rental." Their confidence in the decision and their backup plan in case I declined showed a level of thoughtful planning that Marcus had never demonstrated. They weren't making impulsive demands or creating crises that required immediate resolution. They were adults making responsible choices and inviting me to benefit from their generosity. 3 weeks later, I found myself standing on the front porch of a cottage in Asheville, looking out at mountains that seemed to stretch forever into a sky so blue it looked painted. The house was everything my children had promised: cozy, comfortable, and surrounded by the kind of natural beauty that made daily stress seem insignificant. The move represented more than just a change of location. It was a symbol of the new life I'd built from the ashes of Marcus's betrayal. I was living in a place I loved, surrounded by people who respected me, pursuing interests that brought me joy rather than obligation. My days in Asheville developed their own rhythm. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, watching mist rise from the mountains while planning my day. I'd started painting watercolors, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for when my schedule revolved around Marcus's demands. The local arts center offered classes for seniors, and I'd made friends with other women who shared stories of reinventing themselves in retirement. I volunteered at the Mountain Literacy Council, helping adults improve their reading skills, and I'd started leading a support group for family members of incarcerated individuals. Many of the participants were dealing with the same guilt and confusion I'd experienced, wondering how much support to provide to family members who'd made destructive choices. "The hardest part," said Janet, whose son was serving time for drug trafficking, "is knowing when you're helping and when you're enabling. I want to support him, but I don't want to make it easier for him to continue making bad choices. What I've learned," I shared with the group, "is that real love sometimes looks cruel to the person receiving it. Setting boundaries and allowing consequences to occur can feel like abandonment, but it's actually the most loving thing you can do for someone who needs to change." The conversations in these support groups helped me continue processing my own experience, while helping others navigate similar challenges. Many parents had stories of adult children who'd learned to weaponize family loyalty against them, using guilt and manipulation to maintain financial support or avoid responsibility. One evening, 6 months after moving to Asheville, I received a letter from Marcus. It was the first communication I'd received from him since the single sentence I'd written in response to his previous attempts at reconciliation. The envelope was thick, suggesting another lengthy attempt at manipulation disguised as personal growth. I held the letter for several minutes, debating whether to read it or simply throw it away. Curiosity finally won, and I opened it carefully, prepared to encounter the same manipulation techniques that had controlled me for years. The letter was different from his previous attempts. Instead of focusing on apologies and promises, Marcus had written about his daily life in prison, his interactions with other inmates, and his observations about the criminal justice system. There were no requests for money, no pleas for visits, and no attempts to make me feel guilty for maintaining my boundaries. But, reading between the lines, I could see subtle manipulation techniques embedded in what appeared to be casual conversation. He mentioned other inmates whose families had abandoned them and how much their lack of support affected their rehabilitation prospects. He described programs he was participating in and how family encouragement was crucial for successful completion. The letter was more sophisticated than his previous attempts, but it was still fundamentally designed to manipulate me into resuming contact and support. He'd learned to be less direct in his approach, but the underlying goal remained the same: regaining access to my emotional and financial resources. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a file I'd created for documentation purposes. Then I sat on my porch, looking out at mountains that had witnessed countless human dramas play out over centuries, and felt grateful for the wisdom I'd gained through such painful experience. Marcus might eventually learn to write letters that sounded completely authentic and reformed. He might develop manipulation techniques so subtle that even trained professionals would have difficulty detecting them. But I'd learned to trust my instincts, to value my own well-being, and to recognize that love without boundaries isn't love at all. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that no photograph could capture. I had nowhere else I needed to be, no urgent requests to fulfill, no one else's crisis to manage. For the first time in decades, my life belonged entirely to me, and it was beautiful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.